themselves a leader, there's something fundamentally wrong about that. And look, it happens every time I ask the question. Like, I've asked that question to over 1,000 audiences around the world, different ages, different industries, different backgrounds. Less than 1% of the time that I've asked that question, have I had half the people in a given room willing to raise their hands and call themselves leaders. Less than 1 time out of 100 do I get half the people in the room. And you know what? Most of them were children under the age of 12. Like, there's something about the term leader that the older we get, and supposedly the more independent we get, the more we act like leader is something we need permission to use. That if you get good enough grades and you get a good enough job and you rise high enough in your profession, then one day some external individual or organization is going to bestow upon you whatever it is that you feel you need to make sure that you can call yourself leaders on other people. But until we get that external validation, what I find is that most people think that calling themselves a leader, especially in front of people they respect, they worry that it makes them look cocky or arrogant, so they don't want to do it. Like, what you just saw in this room is indicative of this society-wide tendency to turn leadership into something bigger than us, to make it into something beyond us, to make it about money and power and titles and influence, and to make it something that only a few people can or should aspire to. And you know why it is? It's because of how we taught it to you. Like, I'm from the education system. So when you want to explain a new concept to people, especially young people, and I'm talking like 6, 7 years old, what you do is you give examples of that concept, right? So I want you to think back to the first examples of leaders that you were given. Who were the first people that were held up to you and said, this is what a leader is? Because whatever example you're given at first to define a concept, that defines it for the rest of your life for you. So I'm betting if you think about the examples you were given of what a leader was, my guess is that most of them were giants, right? They were presidents, and they were scientific groundbreakers, and they were people who conquered empires. And the vast majority of them were also white men. And we are still doing that to kids today. They're still being told, look at Warren Buffett invest, and look at Steve Jobs innovate, and look at Mark Zuckerberg create this global empire. And look, I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating successful people. The problem is when we use giants as our primary example of what a leader is, it causes most people, most of all of us, to devalue the leadership that we do demonstrate every day. And we start to let moments of leadership, and when I say moments of leadership, what I mean is moments of compassion and moments of kindness and moments of generosity. We let those moments pass by and we don't call them leadership. We call them little things, right? It's the little things that we do. The problem is when we call moments of compassion and kindness and things that have a powerful interpersonal impact, when we call them little things, without realizing that what we're doing is we're reinforcing the idea that for something to be big, for something to be leadership, it has to make you rich or it has to make you famous. Otherwise, it's just a little thing. And the problem is what it causes is it causes a gap between your identity and what a leader is. And we start to let those moments of leadership pass by. We don't let ourselves feel good about them. We don't let ourselves take credit for them. And for better or for worse, the stuff that makes you feel good when you do it, that's the stuff that you're driven to do every single day. If it feels good, you will do it more frequently. So we let moments of leadership pass us by. We don't celebrate them. We let moments of leadership pass by our colleagues and our friends and the people we love the most, and we don't call those moments leadership. We let them go by being called the little things. What we're effectively doing is we're pulling leadership out of our organizations, we're pulling it out of our communities, off our campuses, and off this planet. And we need it. I've studied leadership my entire adult life. I want to tell you something. There is no shortage of leadership on this planet. But we are systematically ignoring the vast majority of the leadership that exists around us every day. We have created a world where the vast majority of leadership on the planet comes from people who don't see themselves as leaders, and a world where most of the leadership is going by unrecognized and ignored. And I want to talk about how we can start to shift that. What I want to give you today is a tool that you can use today on day one to change the way you think about leadership, because I think what we've taught you to do is to evaluate whether or not you deserve to call yourself a leader by looking at achievements and accolades over time. These big blocks of time. What did I do this year? What have I done in my 4 years at college? What have I done in my life, right? That's how we evaluate our leadership. My argument is that leadership has to be evaluated one day at a time. And the way you do it is by passing the leadership test every day. So I'm going to give you the test so you can start to use it today and give yourself credit for the leadership that you demonstrate and give your friends credit for the leadership they're showing around us every day. Now, the leadership test was born at the University of Toronto when I had a student come in and tell me, you know, it's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to it, isn't it? Which I thought was pretty smart for 21 years of age. Turns out he stole it. Although here's something about leadership. You never steal an idea in leadership. You benchmark a best practice. So I said, let's do a social experiment. I want to actually make this group of students, let's make us all actually live up to the stuff we claim to stand up for. And so I gave them this challenge, and I want you to imagine it for yourselves. I said, I want you to imagine you could pick one value, and one value only. And whatever value you picked, every single person on this campus was guaranteed to do one thing, at least one thing every day that would live up to that value. It would not be the only value they live up to, but it's the only guaranteed one. If you had that power for your campus, what's the one value you would pick that guaranteed that every single member, from faculty to administrators to fellow students, would do at least one thing every day that lived up to it? What would you pick? So I challenged my students for that. And they surprised me because they came out and they said, impact. We pick impact. Now, one of the problems I have is that we throw a lot of words around to judge ourselves and other people, and we have no idea what they mean. Impact, respect, integrity. Like, we use those words all the time because they sound good. But I said this to my students, okay, finish this sentence. Impact is a commitment to what? They never actually considered that before. Respect is a commitment to what? Integrity is a commitment to what? Friendship, service. Finish that sentence. Service is a commitment to what? We've never done it, but we use those words all the time because they sound good. But we never define them. And so they talked for a while and they came and they said, this is what impact is. Impact is a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. I said, I like that. Go do it. That's your assignment. Every day for a week, you have to do one thing that actually lives up to this value. But before you can go home every day, you have to come to my office and you have to tell me specifically what you did to live up to that value. But it was a really good assignment for like 3 days. Because what happened is my students would come to my office and you could see them stand in the outer office and they just do this for a minute. And what they were doing is they were looking back over their day and they were trying to pick out a moment where they'd actually done this. Which was cool because they usually had, but what I realized is they were using their values to evaluate behavior that had already happened. What leaders do is they use their values to drive decision making and to impact what they do in the moment. And clearly they were not keeping this front of mind. So the nice thing about working at a university or college is that there are people who are experts on everything somewhere in the building. So I went down to the psych department and I benchmarked some shit. And I said, look, we have this conscious desire to change our behavior, but it's not enough to just want to do it. Do you have any subconscious drivers? Could you teach me how to manipulate my students' behavior? And they laughed, and they laughed. But I told them what we were trying to do, and they gave me 2 psychological effects that they said, you could probably use these to change the way that people are behaving. And the first is the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect is this. The Zeigarnik effect is the effect by which things that you haven't completed take up a more prominent space in your consciousness than things that you have. In other words, stuff that you haven't finished bugs you. I was not aware there was a scientific term for that. The other one is the question behavior effect. And the question behavior effect says, if I ask you a bunch of questions about a particular behavior in the morning, you are way more likely to engage in that type of behavior later in the day. So if over breakfast I was like, hey, what does generosity mean to you? When was the last time you were really generous? What's the most generous thing anyone's ever done for you? Are you a generous person? You are way more likely to do something generous later in the day. So if anybody wants to borrow money, it is the young woman right here in the front row. She is the one to ask. So what happened is we realized this. If questions are a powerful driver of human behavior, and things that you haven't finished bug you until you finish them, one of the most powerful controllers of human behavior are unanswered questions. The human brain hates unanswered questions. It can't stand them. And so if we figured if we could stick a question into your brain in the morning, it would bother you until you answered it. And the idea was, let's take a different approach then. Let's create a question that's carefully crafted, so that in order to answer it, you got to do something. And if you do that something, you've lived the value. So now it's not this nebulous, vague thing like go out and have impact. It's a very specific thing. Answer this question. What have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? That became the assignment. The idea is this. Leadership's put on such a pedestal that if I walk up to you and I say the way that you act, the way that you treat other people, the way that you do your job, the way that you empower all of your friends and other people in this organization, it inspires me, it makes me want to be a better man, and you were a leader to me. I know, you don't even know me, and I probably just made all that shit up, and yet, you're smiling, right? You're probably not going to walk away. The only thing you could do walking away from that is to feel good, right? So he said, okay, if we answer that question, we've done it, right? And so I sent them out. I said, for 7 days, 12 students and 1 instructor were all going to commit to answering this question and see if it stayed front of mind and if it was more impactful in adjusting our behavior. This question made me quit my job. It worked so well that I now go around and I teach this all over the world because my students destroyed this assignment. They destroyed it. Their parents, former coaches, teachers, the really nice hot dog guy on campus. The hot dog guy on our campus was the nicest dude. He knew when people had midterms, he knew when they won gold medals, and he knew everybody's name, right? And so on Thursday, I go up to buy a hot dog, and he looks at me and says, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm getting a hot dog." He goes, "No, 3 students have told me I'm a leader this week." What are you doing? I committed doing this as well. I did write a book about just what answering this question did for me for those 7 days. A couple of days after we created it, I had to go and give the scariest speech I have ever given in my life. Because I had to go back and speak at my old high school. I know. I don't care who you are, how much money you made, or how cool you think you become. When you walk through the doors of your old high school, you become the person you were in high school. I was not cool in high school. And like, look, I got really good grades. My entire world was based on what my grades were. That was my entire identity. And I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. So I always ended up feeling a little bit alienated and left out. And there was a guy who made that better. And his name was Mr. Peters. And I've had a lot of incredible teachers in my life. And Mr. Peters wasn't one of them. Mr. Peters was the head custodian at my high school. And he is, to this day, perhaps the kindest human being I've ever known. He left notes in people's lockers all the time. If you got a scholarship, anonymous note showed up in your locker. If you won the provincial championship, anonymous note in your locker. If you lost someone, a parent or a friend or a brother or sister, anonymous note in your locker. The most amazing thing about him, though, is that he had this uncanny ability to know who among us felt bullied and alienated and left out. And he would talk to us. And he would make us feel seen for a moment. And look, I think one thing we think that we have to do is to be impressive when we want to impact other people. One of the most powerful gifts you can give another human being sometimes is simply to make them feel seen for a moment. And you know how he did it? Not only did he know our name, but every time he talked to us, he referenced the last conversation we had together. That is a powerful tool of connection for other people because it says to them, I remember you. And to remember someone, you have to see them. If you reference the last conversation you had with someone when you start the next one, you have no idea how much you've made them feel, as if they are a person of worth in that moment. And there were so many days where the only reason I felt seen was because of this man. And 15 years later, I'm standing in the principal's office, about to give a speech. And my principal says, "You want a coffee?" When your high school principal asks you if you want a coffee, it's a cool moment in your life. And I said, "I would like a scotch." And I know you're a high school principal, so I know you got scotch. So she went to get the scotch. And I'm standing there alone in the office, and Mr. Peters walks by, and he looks in the window, and he sees me, and he busts into the principal's office, and he gives me this giant bear hug, and he goes, "Drew Dudley, it is so good to see you." And I look down, and I'm like, Mr. Peters, it's been 15 years since I graduated. I can't believe you know my name. And he says, "Remember your name." Drew, I've been following your whole career. I am so proud of you. Okay. Thank you for doing that, because you made my next point. Two things occur when someone says to you, I am so proud of you, and you know they mean it. One, you go, aww. Some of us do it out loud, some people tap it down deep inside, but you do it. The second one is this. You almost always start to think of the people in your life of whom you're incredibly proud. Everybody in this room has people of whom you're incredibly proud, right? But when was the last time the phrase, I am so proud of you, actually escaped your lips? It's an incredibly powerful moment of leadership and recognition, and we don't make time for it every day because somehow our to-do list has more important things to do than that. That's the type of leadership that we are simply not acting on every day because we called it a little thing, and we think the bigger stuff that we're working on long term is somehow more important than taking time to do stuff like that. But in that moment, I had that question. What have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? And because of that, in that moment, I recognized this is the chance to answer the question. So I looked at it and I said, Mr. Peters, people pay me a lot of money to come to their companies and talk about a particular type of leadership. And it's a type of leadership that you embody perfectly. A type of leadership that focuses simply on finding a way to impact someone positively once a day. And when I was 18, I didn't think that was real leadership. I didn't think it was important. But now I do. And I'm glad I get the chance to tell you, you are one of the greatest leaders I've ever known, so thank you. And I don't know what I expected. Probably another hug. But he just does this. I'm just a janitor who knows you guys before you make it big. Just a janitor. That bugged me so much, I still talk about it 7 years later. Because I get why he said it. Because whether we want to admit it or not, we all kind of know that the world judges each other based on where we fall on the spectrum of financial compensation, right? And he's standing in front of a guy who runs his own company, who gets to be on TV, who gets to write a book, and he does a job that we used to scare kids, that if you don't work hard enough, you're going to end up doing this job. And he knows that. And that's what he meant in that moment when he said, I'm just a janitor. He was acknowledging that. Here's the thing, though. Thousands of students have gone through the halls of my high school in the 36 years that man was a janitor there. And they went on to become all of the things we're taught to celebrate in this world. Doctors and lawyers and architects and engineers and CEOs. And it's my job to interview people like that, to ask them what their values are and how they live them every day. And because a lot of my high school friends have been very successful, I set up interviews with them. And I go and I sit in their corner office, and in every single one of those interviews, at some point I ask them, hey, do you remember Mr. Peters? And to a woman and to a man, they smile when they hear his name. 20 years after they last saw him, they smile at the mere mention of his name. I think that is a remarkable life. And I think that is a life of leadership. And I think that if we're going to start to recognize that leadership, we have to teach ourselves and others that when we evaluate leadership, we have to strip away money, and we have to strip away titles, and we have to strip away jobs, and all we can look at is how people actually behave, whether or not they impact other people in a way that makes their lives better. Because I think we start to realize if we look at leadership like that, we're going to recognize that men like that, those are the leaders that we're ignoring far too often. And not only are we ignoring it, they are too. Because of the word just. Do you have any idea how often we use the word just as a diminisher? I'm just a student. I'm just part-time. I'm just a secretary. I'm just a janitor. And it spills over into how we talk about ourselves and who we are. Look, if you want one simple leadership tip that you can walk out of here with, never allow someone who you know is a person of worth to diminish themselves in front of you. And every time you hear the word just come out of someone else's mouth or out of your own, ask yourself, was that just used as a diminisher? And if it was, call them on it, call yourself on it. Don't allow people, leaders never allow people who they know are people of worth to cut themselves down in front of you. Don't let them do it, and don't teach others to do it as well. Because if you have little brothers and little sisters, when we do it in front of them, we're teaching them, do it to yourself as well. My students came back, and this was an absolutely extraordinary week. When we all sat down, everybody picked one of their best, most impactful moments, and there wasn't a single person in that room who at some point didn't cry in that class. Because it was all of these incredible things that had been driven by this question. We realized we were onto something. So we gave the process a name. Operationalizing leadership values. Because at the University of Toronto, if it doesn't sound pretentious, you're not trying hard enough. 3 steps to operationalize a leadership value. Pick something you want to live up to. Is it integrity? Is it generosity? Is it service? Pick it. Number 2, define what it means. You have to define the things you want to define you. So what is integrity? It's a commitment to whatever value you pick, define it using the words of commitment to. And then 3, create an action-oriented question. One that can't be answered yes or no. One that if you answer it, you'll live the value. And ultimately, make sure that question is a part of your life, non-negotiable every single day. For 30 days, we answered that question, and we journaled how we answered it. And it was so effective that after 30 days, we added a second question, and then a third, then a fourth. By the end of the year, we had 6. By the end of the year, we had what we called the leadership test. This is the philosophy that we adopted, and I still adopt to this day. Every single one of us, me, you, all of you over there, Mark Zuckerberg, every single one of us got up this morning having done the exact same number of things to earn the title of leader. Nothing. All of us got up in the morning and we've accomplished the exact same amount of leadership behaviors. None. And all we can do is focus on whether or not we change that over the course of the day. So imagine this. This is how we start to look at it. Every single day on this planet is day 1 for us. And at the end of the day, before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve another day on this planet. Imagine if that was the case, that every day before you go to sleep, you have to prove you deserve another day on the planet. And you prove it by passing a test. The thing is, you were given the questions for the test in the morning. If that was the case, your priority every day would be to pass the test first and foremost. Get the answers to the questions. And that's what we adopted. We picked 6 questions tied to 6 values, and we needed to get 3 out of 6 of them in order to say we deserve another day on this planet. I'm going to share those 6 with you today so that you can start asking them yourself. And when you come up with the answers to these, every single answer that you create, that is an act of leadership. And when you're putting together 3 of those at least a day, you can't argue that you're a leader. You can't argue you're not a leader. The first one, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? If you make this question a part of your life for 30 days starting right now, your relationships will get better, your grades will get better, and your life will get better. I guarantee you that. Leadership recognized is leadership created. And one of the great things that we can do is start to recognize the leadership that surrounds us every day on our campuses and in our friendships. Because most of the people who you look up to as leaders don't see themselves as one. They don't realize that they're a leader until you point it out to them. Leadership recognizes, leadership created. Answer that question, and you'll start creating more all around you. How about courage? A commitment to taking action when there is a possibility of loss. One of the things I started to realize when I work with students is that I think we slowly educate you out of courage. Because I think that we start to teach you that you begin everything, every class, every assignment at 100%, and every time you make a mistake, you lose points. And you can never get the points back. That's a terrible lesson. Because what it does is it makes people less concerned about how skilled and wise they are right now, and it makes us obsessed with how few mistakes we made along the way. And so we start to educate courage out. We don't take chances where there's a possibility of failure. And you know what? One of the most powerful reasons we do that is because of this really strong subconscious thing that exists in a lot of students' minds, and I call it the list. There is a list of things that exist in your mind of things that you think you have to do for your life to be considered a success. There's a list of things that you have to accomplish so that you don't feel like you're wasting your talent or your opportunities. You're probably not even aware of what that list is. And we created a world where any deviation from that list is seen as reckless and foolish and stupid. And so there's this one list that tends to drive all young people. And I think it ends up making you feel like you're less than you should be. And I think it makes you feel that you can't make the choices that you want because they might pull you away from the list. And the list looks like this. Go to kindergarten and play nice. Go to elementary school and do what the teacher tells you. Go to high school so you can go to a really good college or university. Go to a really good college or university. Get yourself a really good starting salary. Get promoted. Get yourself into a serious long-term relationship. Get promoted. Get married. Get promoted. Buy a house. Get promoted. Have children. Get promoted a couple more times. Retire. Make sure your kids do exactly the same thing. And I watch that list make us all act like our life is some sort of giant scavenger hunt. And we're all handed that list at the beginning on a card, and we're told, here, check off as many of these as you possibly can, as quickly as you can, because everybody else is trying to do it too. And whoever gets to the end first, they get all the good stuff. And so I watched this list start to drive people and control people. And ultimately, I think that we hesitate to do anything that might pull us away from it, no matter how exciting it might be for us, or how right it might be for us. And I think part of it is because we tell you this story that basically goes like this. If you just work hard enough, it will all pay off in the end. If you just work hard enough, it will all pay off in the end. You know what bugs me? We never tell you how hard is hard enough, do we? And we don't do a particularly good job helping you figure out what you want the payoff to actually be. We don't ever really tell you when the end will come, do we? And so we've got a whole bunch of amazing young people like you chasing undefined goals on undefined timelines. And it makes you feel like you're less than you actually are. I've seen this idea make thousands of young people believe that what your professors think of you, what your potential future employers think of you is somehow more important than what you think of yourself. And I have watched that concept make thousands of young people every year believe that the entire purpose of education is to figure out what the market wants, learn it, so you can turn around and offer it right back to the market, regardless of whether it makes you feel alive or has anything to do with your skills and talents. And worst of all, I've watched it make all of the entrepreneurs and the dancers and the actors and the change agents and every one of you in this room whose brilliance cannot be measured on essays and tests, it makes way too many of you feel like your gifts aren't gifts at all. They're only gifts if one day they can be monetized. Otherwise, they should just be hobbies. I think that's a dangerous thing, and I think we start making some young kids believe when they're 7 or 8 years old, man, I'm not going to be very good at filling out the list. How different would this world be if we stopped doing that to 8-year-olds? Here are 4 truths I believe to be true about education, and if they resonate with you, repeat them to yourself when you need to, and to anyone else who you think is struggling. Truth number 1 about education. You are far more brilliant than you give yourself credit for, and you are way more brilliant than any test I can ever give you will truly allow you to show. 2, school is the last place you will spend time in your life where the ability to do well on a test is valued more than the ability to help someone, to change something, to do something. And there are so many more rewards in this world for changing, helping, and doing than there are for writing tests that you owe it to yourself to make sure that when you walk across that stage and graduate, you're as good or better at doing, changing, and helping as you are writing tests, because one day we stop giving them to you. 3, success in leadership cannot be measured by GPAs or by paychecks, and straight A's will not get you a direct path to either one of those things. Success in leadership comes from striving to act every day in a way that makes it more likely you will have a positive impact on your own life and on the lives of other people. And finally, you should work incredibly hard to make your grades amazing. You should work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary. Your grades will open doors for you. Your grades will kick down doors for you. Your transcript is an incredibly important part of your life. However, it is not a measure of your worth as a human being. And I am so tired of watching extraordinary young people believe that because they are a C student, they are somehow a C person. Make yourself a commitment to never allow how you feel about yourself as a person to be determined by a letter or a number that appeared in the top right-hand corner of a piece of paper. Don't let yourself do it, and don't let people who you know are people of worth do it. You should work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary. And then, you should work twice as hard to make sure they are the least impressive thing about you. If you do that, then you truly got yourself an education. Don't be afraid of deviating from the list. What did I try today that might not work but tried anyway? I had a couple of guys who told me they dedicate one day every month to trying to be rejected as many times as possible in that 24-hour period.